Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Data Standard Audio Experience. I'm your host, Catherine Tao. Today, we have Thomas Modern, a data science team lead at Facebook. And today, we're speaking about analytics with empathy. So welcome to the show, Thomas. I'm excited to have you today.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. I'm a huge fan of the podcast, and I'm thrilled to be here today. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. We're so glad to have you. So could you go ahead and just introduce yourself and tell the audience more about your background?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born in Brazil, moved to Colorado when I was 9 years old, and most of my family is still in São Paulo. And outside of COVID times, I love to go back. And it's funny, growing up in the US, I always felt like the Brazilian guy growing up. And soon in Brazil, I started to feel like the American guy, American gringo, when I developed, a small accent and wasn't keeping up with the latest slang. And in some ways, I felt like I didn't quite belong in either. But this multiculturalism has also taught me a lot and has played an important part in my life and certainly career as well, in being able to put myself in the shoes of others and think in global terms, as we'll be talking more about in this podcast. I studied economics at the wonderful liberal arts school in Colorado College. But after undergrad, largely felt quite lost and wasn't especially good at thinking ahead at that time and doing internships, preparing for life after school. The economy was still struggling after the financial crisis. So pretty challenging time for me, but eventually landed a job as a internationalization engineer where I would help localize software to Portuguese and Spanish speaking markets. And it gave me my first view as to the importance of multiculturalism in business. And started to find my bearings slowly, pursued an MBA as I worked on the side. I realized I didn't want to follow the more traditional route of finance, consulting. So I decided to go into analytics and do a second master's, and found I really loved bridging technical and non-technical worlds, and really resonated with me and gave me, my career more direction. So in years since, I've always worked in tech companies, working closely to product teams, typically in a global sense as well. And so over the years, I've worked as a BI developer, doing product analytics, decision science, and more recently working as a data scientist as well.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. And I know offline you had talked to me a little bit about this hedgehog concept and the inner game. So can you tell the audience more about what this is?
Yeah, absolutely. Growing up, I was single-mindedly focused on playing tennis. I would wake up at 4 a.m. to practice before high school. I go hit against the wall by myself, and even while it was snowing out. And tennis served as a channel for me to get to know myself, my strengths, my inner demons. And my Bible, so to speak, on that journey was a book called The Inner Game of Tennis. And the book's simple premise is that we all have two selves. Self one is the ego mind, or the teller, right? Hit the ball like this or like that. And self two is one's natural ability to do things. It's the doer. It's the actual movement of the muscles hitting the ball. And in order to achieve peak performance, we have to allow self one to quiet down a little bit and allow self two to do what it already knows how to do. And so it touches on the natural abilities that we already possess, and how a large part of being your best self is just not getting in your own way, right? And so it provided a framework for questions like, how can I develop my self-knowledge and use it as a source of personal empowerment? And then why at times do I self-sabotage and get in the way of my own success? Or other times I feel like things have an effortless flow to it, and I'm fully playing in the zone, as athletes call it, right? And so this was what initially kicked off a curiosity for self-knowledge and an understanding of the inner game, or you might call it EQ, or simply an awareness of what's beneath the surface, right? Which at the time felt very specific to tennis, but now, of course, I realize that it permeates everything I do, certainly including day-to-day work and career as well. And meanwhile, the hedgehog concept, as you asked, is a framework that was made popular by the classic business book, Good to Great. And the hedgehog concept is based on an ancient Greek parable that states, the fox knows many things, but the hedgehog knows one big thing. And in the parable, the fox uses many strategies to try to catch the hedgehog, right? It sneaks and it pounces, it races, it plays dead. And yet every time it walks away defeated with its nose prickled by spines. And the fox never learns that the hedgehog knows how to do one big thing really well, which is to defend itself. And so this framework is, obviously as good or bad as you make it, but the invitation is for each person and organization to find his or her own hedgehog concept. And so for me personally, in early stages of my career, I would definitely question my self-worth and largely play the comparison game of wishing I could be as well-connected or intelligent or quick-witted as person XYZ. I was never the person who didn't have to study much and would still do well in exams, right? I just wasn't that person. But when I started to define what my hedgehog concept is for myself, that's when my career started to take off. And I started to take self-responsibility for my failures and limitations, which ironically also gives one more empowerment, right? And so I leveraged my tenacity from the earlier tennis days, for example, knowing that we live in this golden age of learning where there's invaluable educational content widely available. And so I'd constantly take on courses from Coursera, Udacity, LinkedIn Learning, while on the go. Like I'd be getting ready for work in the morning or doing mundane chores. And for a while, I thought that that's what everyone else does, right? But it just felt so obvious. But I realized that most people just get a bit complacent or aren't organized about their own learning. So that was something unique to my own hedgehog concept. And so I embraced my own sensitivity and propensity towards empathy, which helped me bridge worlds and see concrete gaps in business problems that other people might have missed, right? So I was able to start manifesting my brand as a professional and naturally, start to attract increasingly good opportunities. And so, lastly, I'll say there's nothing that says that your hedgehog concept needs to be exciting in nature, but hey, it's still your superpower and can move mountains when you embrace it.
Yeah, I really like this. This is a very interesting perspective to kind of look at it. And you also mentioned to me offline that analytics requires a really deep understanding of all of these pain points and challenges that might come with working in this specific industry. And so can you walk us through how you kind of view the role of empathy as it relates to analytics just in general?
Yeah, it's a great question. Empathy is a big word and probably not used all that often in analytics circles, but I'll try to explain. So obviously, machine learning, big data, deep learning, get a lot of buzz. But I find that many of the biggest business challenges are deeply human in nature and require deeply human thinking to solve. So when aspiring data scientists look to companies like Facebook, Google, and beyond, they often focus on cutting edge AR and VR or machine learning, and certainly there's a place for all of these. But I find that some of the most challenging and quite frankly for me, fascinating questions that many top companies are trying to answer are questions like, how do we help overcome the barriers of affordability, right? Not everyone can afford to buy a nice smartphone or pay for data plans. So how can we help lower the barriers to allow more democratized access to the internet? Or how do we help people who live maybe in rural areas who may not have access to the internet? One doesn't need to look far, right? In the US alone, there are 20 million people who don't yet have access to high-speed internet at home? Or how do we engage people in e-commerce who have been excluded by traditional financial institutions, right? ML and cutting-edge analytics certainly play a part, but the starting point is always grounding oneself in the human element, right? And empathy is a bridge. If I can truly put myself in the shoes of the other, I'll have a more meaningful connection. It probably means I also build better products that people choose to use, or ask the right guiding questions as I start on a new deep dive analytics project, right? And so it's interesting that on the product side, when tackled with creating a new product, any good PM that's facing the challenging 0 to 1 stage will always start with deeply understanding the pain points that people face, not the product itself or the metric that needs to be moved, right? That comes later. And so I believe this point is not emphasized enough in analytics, where we often tend to overly focus on methods. And, I'm sorry to say it, but beyond your fellow data scientists, the rest of the world probably doesn't care if you're using XGBoost or LightGBM in your predictive models, right? What matters is your impact in solving big problems, which tend to be deeply human at the core, right? And so some of the best analyses of my career have had a harmonious blend of quantitative investigation, but also important qualitative aspects, right? I remember a few years ago, I was assigned a major deep dive project to understand why one of the key metrics for the company was declining. And it was concerning for the leadership team. And I had a couple of weeks to work on it. I was leading a squad in this effort. And we used many interesting quantitative approaches, including NLP, semi-supervised learning, things like that. But we also made a point of leading interviews directly with end users of the app. And we learned things that the data alone would never have shown, right? Many people were confused by the new features, and they explained the context in which they would use the app, which was often on the go, holding a child or two at a grocery store and trying to use this app. And so how do you account for this when looking at the data alone? You really can't, right? And I've also seen the other side of the coin, where maybe lack of empathy and some arrogance from a sort of ivory tower tech company mindset can lead to decisions that are completely misaligned with the broader ecosystem. And so empathy in analytics isn't a nice to have, it's essential.
Yeah, and that definitely sounds great. And what kind of advice do you have for those kind of in the earlier stages of their career, looking to go into more of an analytics kind of career?
Yeah, definitely. On the themes expressed, earlier, when interviewing for top tech companies, you'll very much be tested not only on your foundational technical analytics skills, but also your ability to convey product sense, largely by putting yourself in the shoes of end users around the world, right? Showing empathy for how someone maybe in Brazil versus Nigeria versus India or anywhere else might view products very differently. Are you able to account for these cultural differences? Number two, can you navigate today's VUCA world, which is volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, right? Top companies operate in blue ocean, uncharted markets where there's often no precedent for what works or doesn't. And so can you harness creativity and create structure to find direction in such an environment, right? Number three, are you a holistic thinker who can view problems in terms of different stakeholders, right? So end users, product, engineering, and so forth. Do you understand the interplay between the specific feature that you're responsible for as it relates to the overall app or product? Maybe use design thinking principles, things like that. And another thing too is that regardless of how you go about your early learning and career experiences, it's really important to be aware of what industry trends are, right? So what are the waves, so to speak, that are waning or gaining momentum? And if you choose a growing wave, you're bound to find success, right? One example is in machine learning, for example, is that it's increasingly getting commoditized, right? We see the rise of ML as a service, where the major cloud providers often offer plug and play solutions, right, that make it easy. We see the rise of auto ML that takes care of data preprocessing and finding the best parameters. Algorithms are more flexible than they ever were before. Yeah, and they require less specialized knowledge of the analyst, right? And so what does this mean? It means that just knowing Python and scikit-learn or whatever similar skill set is simply not enough to differentiate oneself anymore. One needs to be able to convey the ability to successfully navigate the more human elements of collaboration, communication, and certainly empathy. But also, to be clear, this isn't diametrically opposed to analytics methods, right? For example, some of the most cutting edge research in ML, and certainly this is one of the rising waves that I alluded to, is to open up the algorithmic black box a bit to ensure that powerful models stop perpetuating society's systemic biases, racism, stereotypes, and prejudice, right? And on this topic, as an example, Microsoft has recently made open source its fantastic Fair Learn library, which can help mitigate bias in models, right? And so these are brand new types of problems being taken on in the realm of what we might call socio-technical challenges of our time. And the more you align with these new cutting edge waves, the more fulfilled you'll likely be, and certainly successful as well, as you'll be contributing to something hugely important to society, right? And so one could say that empathy is at the root of all these ideas that I shared. And the last thing I'll say too is that having self-empathy is hugely important too, right? In the early stages of my career, I was hugely self-critical, right? Why am I not able to land even an entry-level job? Why didn't I do more internships in college or go to an Ivy League school, and so forth? But that just got in the way, right? So as an example, when I come across the all too common 5 to 10 years of experience requirement, that's so annoying, even for apparently entry-level jobs. When I started to have more self-empathy, I also took self-responsibility, which led to concrete actions and positive outcomes. For example, I realized that while I couldn't control my years of experience, what I had control over was increasing the breadth of experiences. So I completed MOOC courses or did a pro bono project for a nonprofit, or one could write an article on medium.com. There's lots of ways to go about it. But all of a sudden, hiring managers started to focus less on years of experience and more on my well-rounded recent experience. So I realized I could control the framing and change it to a glass half full scenario.
Yeah, that's a great way to really think about everything. Great advice to our viewers also. Thank you. How would you really define success in a person's career? Since there's many different ways of defining success, but how would you view this in your opinion?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think a clear signal of success is that you're probably having to say no more to others than others are saying no to you. It's probably an indication that you and your personal brand and skills are being valued. But if I had to summarize success, it'd be having the freedom to make one's own choices, right? For me, this manifests as when I wake up in the morning, I'm making the choice to do the type of work I want to be doing, work for the company that I want to, or at some point maybe choose a more entrepreneurial path. My basic needs are met of being able to own a home, travel to see family in Brazil or for leisure, maybe at some point take a year or two off as a sabbatical. But beyond having one's needs met at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, it really becomes more about how fulfilled do you feel, right? And given the deeply troubling state of the world, this probably means that you're not just contently operating in a vacuum, but rather serving as an agent for positive change, right? you're putting in motion positive dynamics that leave the world a bit better than how you found it, right? So for me personally, I'm increasingly fulfilled by mentoring more junior colleagues and young professionals to help others find success in their professional journeys and, in life more broadly.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think mentorship is something that's very important for people to also have early on in their career to really figure out what they'd like to do in the future and just to follow this path. So that's great that you're very open to that. And that's something that we're actually trying to launch in the future. So maybe we can definitely have some kind of collaboration with you to mentor some university students or of some sort like that. Yeah.
Excellent. I love that.
And I just wanted to talk about the data standard for a little bit as well. So we're building a community where everyone can just network and collaborate with each other. And it's just a place where everyone can just show empathy. And that's one thing that we really try to hone in on as well. So what is something the community can do for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, a big thank you for the work that you are already doing. So just please keep doing this kind of fantastic work and even more to engage and connect the community at large. The world is in crisis, and I think genuine connection, like what you're fostering, is really the key to get through these challenging times. So, more of this kind of work, and I'm also happy to be connected with fellow analytics enthusiasts, and also be referred to my career coaching practice.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll definitely connect you with other people within our community after the call as well. And where can everyone find you online to connect?
Yeah, so just on LinkedIn, just with my name, Thomas Modern, you'll be able to find me, and yeah, happy to connect with others.
Yeah, great. And to our audience, for more information on the data standard, you can find us at www.datastandard.io, as well as on our LinkedIn and YouTube channel. So thank you so much, Thomas, for joining us. It was such a pleasure to have you today.
Thank you so much, Catherine.